that didn't just turn the calendar page, but fundamentally reshaped the Middle East and really global geopolitics. We're talking about 1979 to 1989, a period that witnessed the dawn of a new Iran, a nation undergoing a seismic, almost unimaginable shift that continues to echo today.
Indeed. The departure of the Shah, a key American ally who had steered Iran on a decidedly pro-Western secular course for decades, and the dramatic, triumphant return of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini from 15 years of exile, it didn't just spark a revolution, it ignited an ideological earthquake.
Right.
This new Islamic Republic instantly set itself on a collision course, not just with its immediate neighbors, but with its own past alliances. And particularly, its surprisingly complex and, well, utterly transformed relationship with Israel. That's a key part of this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And our mission today is to really dig into the sources, extract the most critical nuggets, guiding you through the brutal 8-year Iran-Iraq war, and also uncovering the secret, almost shocking role Israel played in one of the Cold War's most infamous scandals, the Iran-Contra Affair.
It's a period forged in fire, faith, and blood. A time where public pronouncements, death to America, death to Israel, often masked these incredibly complex clandestine dealings.
Exactly. And geopolitical alliances shifted in ways few could have possibly predicted back then. So let's unpack this pivotal moment where the world watched, really unsure if this new Iran was a beacon of hope for a global Islamic awakening or, a harbinger of chaos that would engulf an entire region. So to truly grasp the conflicts of the monumental decisions made throughout this tumultuous decade, you first have to understand the foundational change within Iran itself. This was far more than just a governmental change, more than one leader replacing another. It was a fundamental reshaping of a nation's very identity, driven by a powerful, all-encompassing new ideology.
Yes, and what's truly fascinating here, and central to everything that follows, is the core of Khomeini's ideology. Walayat faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist.
Right. Can you break that down a bit? What did it actually mean in practice?
Well, it wasn't merely about incorporating religious principles into public life or, having clerics advise the government, nothing like that. No, this ideology was a radical departure from traditional Shia thought. And crucially, it unequivocally placed the supreme political authority directly in the hands of the clergy.
So the top cleric is the ultimate decision-maker, above everyone.
Exactly. The highest decision-making power resided with the supreme religious leader, the faqih. He was seen as the guardian of the community, the interpreter of divine law. It fundamentally altered the entire structure of governance and society. It established a theocratic system where religious law, as interpreted by that supreme jurist, superseded everything else.
Wow. So the Constitution, secular laws, all secondary.
Essentially, yes, it was a complete overhaul, impacting everything from national policy down to personal conduct, defining what it meant to be an Iranian citizen in this new Islamic Republic.
And this was such a stark, almost unimaginable contrast to Iran's past under the Shah, wasn't it? Before '79, the Shah's regime, despite its issues, was secular and quietly a strategic ally to Israel. I mean, they were supplying oil, intelligence.
That's right. A pragmatic, if often hidden relationship based on shared strategic interests, non-Arab states, wary of Nasserism, Soviet influence. They saw common enemies. Iran provided crucial oil to Israel after the Suez Crisis, for instance. There was intelligence sharing, even some military cooperation.
But post-revolution, everything changed. Overnight, it seems.
Utterly. The shift was immediate and absolute. Khomeini's worldview was fundamentally anti-imperialist, anti-Western, and Israel was seen as the embodiment of that Western intrusion in the region. And we see figures like Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who would later become supreme leader, articulating this dramatic ideological turn. He famously called Israel a cancerous tumor.
That phrase really stuck. And it wasn't just rhetoric, was it?
Not at all. It translated directly into tangible, active support for groups fighting Israel. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, which Iran was instrumental in founding and funding, and later Hamas in the Palestinian territories. It cemented Iran's new, openly hostile stance towards the Israeli state. It was the definitive end of that quiet, pragmatic alliance and the beginning of outright ideological opposition. That set the stage for decades of tension we still see.
Let's talk more about Khamenei. His early life seems quite significant in understanding his worldview.
It really is. His experiences deeply reflect the revolutionary fervor. He was born in Mashhad in 1939, a very holy city in Iran. His father was a respected cleric, Jawad Khamenei, but the family lived a life of asceticism, quite poor actually, which stood in stark contrast to the increasing opulence and westernization you saw under the Shah.
Right, you mentioned that quote about sometimes only having bread and raisins for supper.
Yes, exactly. He recounted that himself, describing their small home, just one room and a basement. He said they often had to squeeze into the basement when visitors came to see his father. This humble, even impoverished, beginning profoundly shaped his worldview. It gave him an acute awareness of the common people's struggles and fueled his convictions against what he saw as a corrupt, extravagant monarchy.
And his political awakening started really young, at 13.
Remarkably young, yes. He was deeply inspired by a cleric named Nawab Safavi, who was railing against the Shah's regime in a lecture at Khamenei's school. Khamenei became an Islamic scholar, and Mushajed started teaching, but you could see politics was pulling him in. By 1962, he's a devoted disciple of Imam Khomeini himself.
Following Khomeini's opposition to the Shah's pro-Western policies,
Exactly. Opposing the White Revolution, the suppression of religious institutions. This early alignment was a direct precursor to Iran's post-revolution anti-Western stance. It really signaled the path he would follow. He got involved in revolutionary activities, carrying secret messages, organizing protests, distributing pamphlets, all under the watchful eye of Savak, the Shah's feared secret police.
which brings us to that question. How does a relatively low-ranking cleric climb so high? It seems his resilience under Savak played a huge role.
Absolutely. His journey was forged in defiance and suffering. He was arrested, tortured, exiled 6 times by Savak. He spent months in solitary confinement, endured unimaginable hardship. Yet, the remarkable thing is he never backed down.
Each time he got out, he went right back to it.
Immediately. Back to teaching, organizing, speaking out. This incredible tenacity, this unwavering commitment, it hardened him. And it hardened an entire generation of revolutionaries who would lead the new republic. It instilled in them this fierce resistance to external pressure. They had been tested by fire, and they emerged completely unyielding.
And that didn't stop after the revolution, the assassination attempt in 1981.
A truly horrifying event. A bomb planted by the MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq organization, exploded while he was giving a speech. It left his right arm partially paralyzed, caused permanent damage to his vocal cords and lungs. He carries those physical scars to this day.
It's a testament to his resilience, his ability to endure.
It really is. He was clearly a survivor, deeply entrenched in the movement. And those personal sacrifices, the physical scars, they only deepened his credibility within the new regime and probably reinforced that conviction among the leadership that they were constantly under attack, needing to be vigilant and, well, uncompromising.
So connecting this back to Khomeini's vision, it wasn't just about changing Iran, was it? He saw this as something much bigger.
Far bigger. He didn't just see the revolution as a domestic triumph. He spoke passionately, frequently, of a global Islamic awakening. He framed the Iranian Revolution not merely as a national achievement, but as a universal blueprint, a model for the entire Muslim world to follow.
A call to arms, almost.
In a way, yes. A message designed to resonate with and ignite revolutionary fervor across the region, encouraging other Muslim populations to rise up against what he saw as corrupt, Western-backed regimes and establish their own Islamic states. He envisioned a kind of pan-Islamic movement unified under these revolutionary principles, a direct ideological challenge to the existing order.
And this concept, exporting the revolution, that must have sent chills down the spines of the neighboring monarchies.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. The Gulf monarchies were terrified. Saudi Arabia especially saw itself as the leader of the Sunni Islamic world, the guardian of the holy sites. This Shia revolution was a direct challenge, but the threat was felt perhaps most acutely by Saddam Hussein's aggressively secular Ba'athist regime in neighboring Iraq.
Because the ideological gap was just massive.
Massive. You had a theocratic Iran trying to spread its revolutionary zeal, having just overthrown its own monarchy, and next door, a secular Iraq clinging to its nationalist strongman rule. The potential for clash was enormous.
And you mentioned Saddam's extreme fear. Why was he particularly paranoid?
Well, Iraq, despite being Sunni-led by Saddam and the Ba'ath Party, has a historically significant majority Shia population, the same branch of Islam as revolutionary Iran. Saddam was genuinely terrified that Khomeini's call, his sermons broadcast into Iraq, his appeals for Islamic unity against corrupt rulers would resonate deeply with his own Shia citizens.
He'd already suppressed Shia uprisings before, right?
Brutally, yes. He feared Iranian incitement would just pour gasoline on that fire, undermining his iron-fisted rule. So for Saddam, this wasn't just a border dispute about the Shatt al-Arab waterway anymore, though that was part of it. It became an ideological war for his very survival, a battle for the loyalty of his own people. He saw Iran as an immediate, profound, destabilizing threat. He felt he had to act decisively, strike first, before this revolutionary contagion spread across the border.
So the ideological battle lines are drawn, Saddam's fear is festering, his territorial ambitions are there, and he decides to invade, September 1980.
Exactly. Iraqi forces pour across the border, launching a full-scale invasion. And Saddam expected, maybe even presumed, a swift victory. He looked at Iran, still chaotic from the revolution, the military purged of Shah loyalists, internationally isolated, and thought, now's the time we can deliver a knockout blow.
You couldn't have been more wrong.
Couldn't have been more wrong. His objectives were clear and incredibly ambitious. First, topple the Islamic Republic before it could consolidate power and export itself. Second, seize the oil-rich Khuzestan province, hoping the Arab population there might even welcome them. Third, gain full control of the Shatt al-Arab waterway, nullifying that 1975 Algiers agreement he resented, and ultimately establish Iraq as the dominant military power in the Gulf, replacing Iran.
But Iran, despite the chaos, rallied with this incredible ferocity.
Astonishing ferocity. The invasion, ironically, became a unifying cause. Khomeini and the leadership immediately framed it as defy Muqaddas, a holy defense.
A holy defense of the homeland and the revolution itself.
Precisely. This external threat allowed the regime to consolidate power, silence internal dissent. Critics were labeled unpatriotic or un-Islamic, and galvanized popular support. It transformed revolutionary fervor into this nationalistic, religious imperative. Millions were mobilized to the front lines.
And it didn't become the swift war Saddam wanted. It devolved into something medieval, almost.
It really did. Brutal, regressive, echoing World War I. We saw trench warfare stretching for hundreds of miles, a horrifying war of attrition. Human life became tragically expendable.
And this is where we see those devastating human wave attacks by the Pasdaran and the besieged militia. Can you describe that? It's hard to even imagine.
It's difficult to fully convey the scale of sacrifice. We're talking about young recruits, many of them teenagers, some barely 12 or 13, driven by this intense religious zeal, sometimes given plastic keys to paradise to wear, believing martyrdom guaranteed heaven. They would literally charge fortified Iraqi positions, overwhelming them through sheer numbers, sometimes clearing minefields with their bodies.
Just waves of people.
Wave after wave, incredibly costly in human terms, but tragically, sometimes, profoundly effective militarily. Breaking through defenses where conventional forces might have stalled, it forged this unique, almost terrifying resolve.
And adding another layer of horror was the widespread use of chemical weapons, mainly by Iraq.
Yes, a truly horrific aspect. Iraq used chemical weapons, mustard gas, nerve agents like taboon and sarin on an industrial scale against Iranian troops. The effects were agonizing. Terrible deaths, long-term health problems for survivors, immense psychological trauma.
And it wasn't just soldiers, was it? The attack on Halabja.
That came later. In 1988, Saddam turned those same horrific weapons against his own Kurdish population in Halabja. An estimated 3,000 to 5,000 civilians killed in a single day. A clear act of genocide. It was a chilling display of the war's brutality, Saddam's utter ruthlessness, and a stark violation of international law. Yet the international response at the time was, frankly, muted. Geopolitics often trumped humanity.
And the war spilled beyond the front lines, too. The War of the Cities, the Tanker War.
Right. The War of the Cities saw both sides firing missiles, mostly studs, at each other's capitals and major cities. Tehran, Baghdad, Isfahan, Basra, bringing terror directly to civilians. And the tanker war in the Gulf saw attacks on oil shipping, threatening global supplies, drawing in international navies, including the U.S., to protect shipping lanes. It turned the Gulf into a powder keg.
So 8 years of this, an unmitigated catastrophe.
Absolutely. Over 1 million lives lost, hundreds of billions in economic devastation, both nations crippled, shattered. But it had lasting impacts. It hugely solidified the power of the Revolutionary Guards, the Pasdaran, in Iran. They emerged as this powerful, autonomous military and ideological force, deeply loyal to the revolution, with their own economic interests, too.
And Khamenei, as president during most of this, his influence grew.
Significantly. He served as president from 81, re-elected in 85. He was consistently involved, visiting the front lines, making speeches, involved in war councils. This deepened his ties and influence with the Pasdaran, securing their loyalty. The war was a crucible, shaping the future direction of the republic and its leadership. forging that hardline, resilient, fiercely independent stance we still see.
Okay, so amidst all this brutality and the public death to Israel rhetoric from Iran, we get this unbelievable twist. Israel secretly supplying arms to Iran. How does that even happen?
It's pure, unadulterated realpolitik. Cold, pragmatic calculations of power and self-interest, completely overriding ideology or public statements. Remember, before 79, Iran and Israel weren't enemies. They were quiet allies. After the revolution, Israel looked at the map, and its biggest conventional military threat wasn't the new, chaotic Iran. It was Saddam Hussein's large, well-equipped, ambitious Iraqi army.
Iraq was seen as the more immediate danger, despite Iran's rhetoric.
Exactly. Iraq had a proven military, ambitions for regional dominance, a history of confronting Israel. So from Israel's perspective, a long, bloody, grinding war between Iran and Iraq, well, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
The enemy of my enemy principle in action.
Precisely. Let your two biggest regional threats bleed each other dry. Keep them occupied, weaken them both. For Tel Aviv, a weakened Iran and a weakened Iraq was the ideal strategic outcome. It sounds cynical, and it was, but that was the strategic logic driving these secret dealings, despite the public declarations of mutual annihilation.
So how did this actually manifest? How did the deals happen? This leads us to Iran-Contra, right?
It culminates in the infamous Iran-Contra Affair. The U.S., under Reagan, had its own pressing objective, freeing American hostages held by Iranian-backed groups in Lebanon. Hezbollah, primarily.
Huge political pressure back on.
Immense pressure, driving them to seek, let's say, unorthodox solutions, even legally questionable ones.
The deal itself was complex, to say the least.
Astonishingly brazen, really. A multi-layered covert op. The basic structure was the U.S. would secretly authorize Israel to sell American-made weapons to Iran, specifically things Iran desperately needed.
Like anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles.
Right.
TOWs and hair case.
Exactly. Weapons to counter Iraq's superiority in armor and air power. In exchange for Israel facilitating these sales, Iran would use its influence with its proxies in Lebanon to get the American hostages released.
Arms for hostages, essentially, with Israel as the middleman.
Correct. It provided a layer of plausible deniability for the U.S., which officially had an arms embargo against Iran.
But then it got even more complicated with the Contra part.
Yes, the scandal deepened significantly. The money generated from these illegal arms sales to Iran wasn't just banked, it was secretly and illegally diverted. Funneled to fund the Contra rebels, the right-wing paramilitary group fighting the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua.
Which was directly against U.S. law at the time, the Boland Amendment.
A flagrant violation of the Boland Amendment, which prohibited U.S. aid to the Contras. Congress had specifically forbidden it.
So a massive scandal erupts in the U.S. congressional hearings, indictments. But for our focus today, it just perfectly highlights this extreme geopolitical paradox. Publicly, America backs Iraq. Secretly, via Israel, it's arming Iran.
It encapsulates the complex, contradictory, clandestine nature of international relations during this period. How domestic pressures, like freeing hostages, can lead a superpower to essentially betray its stated foreign policy, arm a declared adversary, and leave this tangled legacy of distrust and cynicism that still resonates, frankly.
So fast forward to 1988, 8 brutal years. Both sides are just exhausted.
Utterly exhausted. The human cost, the economic cost, simply unsustainable, pushing both nations to the brink. Even for Khomeini, the revolutionary leader, there was a moment of grim recognition. He famously described accepting the UN-brokered ceasefire, Resolution 598, as drinking a cup of poison.
A bitter pill to swallow, acknowledging the war couldn't be won militarily.
Exactly. A painful acknowledgement that continuing would mean total ruin, despite the immense sacrifices made.
And the war ends in a stalemate.
A devastating stalemate. Borders didn't change. Neither side gained tangible territory. Saddam certainly didn't achieve his grand objectives, yet the legacy of this decade of fire was profound, enduring, for both nations, for the whole region, shaping trajectories for decades.
For Iran, the revolution survived, maybe even hardened by the war.
It did. The external threat helped consolidate the regime's power, purged internal dissent, forged a more unified, resilient state. But the nation was left economically crippled, infrastructure shattered, internationally isolated due to its revolutionary stance and sanctions. And then, Khomeini's death in 1989, just a year after the ceasefire. That truly marked the end of the revolution's first fiery chapter, left a huge void.
And for Iraq, Saddam claims victory.
Publicly, yes, victory against Iranian aggression, defender of the Arab nation, all that rhetoric. But beneath the surface, Iraq was bankrupt, massively in debt. especially to Kuwait, which had bankrolled much of his war effort.
Setting the stage for his next gamble.
Precisely. That desperate financial situation, combined with his ambition, paranoia, lingering belief in his military might, it led directly to the invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and we all know how that ended.
And for the wider region, this cemented the Shia-Sunni rift.
Deeply entrenched it. The sectarian and ideological divide between Shia Iran and the predominantly Sunni Arab world, with Iraq at its center, became a permanent, defining feature of the Middle East landscape. Fueled by the war's brutality, it intensified proxy conflicts, regional rivalries, from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq itself. The seeds of future conflict were firmly sown in that decade.
So Khomeini dies in '89, a massive void, and Ali Khamenei ascends to supreme leader. That was something of a surprise, wasn't it? He wasn't the highest-ranking cleric.
It was a surprise to many. He lacked Khomeini's towering religious stature. One expert called him comparatively a lightweight in the theocratic hierarchy at that time. He didn't hold the highest rank of Marja Taqlid. But conveniently, a constitutional change had just been made right before Khomeini's death, lowering the religious requirement for the supreme leader role.
Paving the way for him.
It certainly looked that way, perhaps indicating a pre-planned succession managed behind the scenes.
So he takes over at 50. A huge task, stepping into Khomeini's shoes.
Monumental. And he rapidly set about transform the republic into what he saw as a fortress, himself as the unchallenged gatekeeper. He consolidated power, tightened control over everything, judiciary, media, the Pasdaran, the political system, systematically purging reformist voices, potential rivals, ensuring the hardline revolutionary ideology remained dominant, cementing his own authority.
And symbolic changes, too. The flag?
Yes, that was significant. The old flag, with the lion and sun symbols of Iran's monarchical pre-Islamic past, was definitively replaced. The new flag featured the stylized Allah and Allah Akbar repeated 22 times for the date of the revolution's victory in the Persian calendar. It wasn't just aesthetics. It was a powerful visual break from the past, signaling this new, consolidated, unyielding Islamic identity to the world.
So the war was over. But the struggle, the ideology, the push for this distinct Iranian identity, that continued under Khamenei.
Continued, unabated. Iran had to find its way in a changed world, a world it had helped change, under a new leader consolidating his power.
While Iraq, under Saddam, was already stumbling towards its next disaster.
Exactly. This decade, 1979, 1989, it truly laid the groundwork for so many dynamics we still see today. The continued deep tension with Israel, a relationship, as we've seen, far more complex than just the public statements suggest. The drive for a powerful defense capability, maybe even nuclear latency, even with Khamenei's fatwa against nuclear weapons, the capability itself remains a strategic factor. And the enduring challenge of international sanctions. It all has roots here.
So reflecting on this deep dive into Iran's decade of fire, what really stands out? How do these intertwined stories, revolution, war, the incredible paradox of the Iran-Israel arms deals, how do they illuminate the complexities we still grapple with in the Middle East today?
I think it highlights the enduring power of ideology, but also the brutal pragmatism of geopolitics. How stated enmities can mask hidden collaborations driven by perceived national interest.
It certainly wasn't just a historical footnote, was it? It was foundational, creating ripples that are still shaping events. And if domestic politics and national interest can drive nations, even superpowers, to act in such contradictory ways, arming declared enemies through secret channels, what does that suggest about the underlying currents of international relations, even now? Is it always about fear, profit, and power, as some argue? It's definitely something to think about.